Hi there, everyone, and welcome again to Two Man Talking. James and I reviewing a book which will hopefully inspire you in your work. And this week we're looking at a book called Deep Work, which is basically a great book, actually. And it's about rules for focused success in a distracted world. And it's an American book. I found it really interesting, James. I'm not sure what your views on it were.
Yeah, I thought it was very readable. I mean, it's the guy who wrote it, Cal Newport, is a computer scientist. It's written very well, but it's quite scientific in his approach. Yeah. It's very regimented, and I quite like that. It's very tight.
No,
very
definitely.
tight.
I think we were saying we'd have a little chat just before we were recording here, and we both liked the tightness of it. It was very well thought through, and had great architecture to the chapters. They weren't just rambling all over the place. They were pretty, well structured.
I think he's written about 6 books, hasn't he? And I've not read any of his other ones.
No, I haven't either. I mean, interestingly, one thing I didn't follow up on either, but he wrote a blog on study hacks. So
I think right up your street.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was. I would like to have a look at it really, and I think it was how to help MBA students and people like that to study better. So he's very much into understanding the mind and neuroscience. The whole objective of writing the book was about helping you achieve more in less time.
Yeah,
and he was talking about deep work being a superpower. You can develop this skill. It's a great skill to have.
So the book's in 2 parts, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're going to look at part 1 this week, and then we'll do part 2 in another podcast, because there's quite a lot to cover, really. Part 1 is called The Idea. He's discussing what deep work is, why it's rarely done, and why it's meaningful. And then part 2, which we'll do in the next podcast, really a set of rules, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I liked his introduction, talking about Carl Jung. Carl Jung went off to live in a tower in St. Gallen, near Lake Zurich, in the 20s, because he wanted to get a lot of stuff done, and he'd fallen out with Sigmund Freud.
Yeah, he's got some great anecdotes, as well as the scientific neuroscience proof from psychologists, from philosophers. Yeah, I thought it was really well researched, and where you want to be and how people who do this achieve. I think I can't remember the guy's name, but he was the youngest professor of Wharton, wasn't he? That, and how what he did was, I mean, it'll become clear when we discuss each chapter, but he's basically saying we should concentrate on one thing because we will become much better at that one thing. It's essentially what he was saying, wasn't he?
Yeah.
That's why deep work was valuable.
So I liked his definition on page 3 of the introduction. Deep work is professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limits. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. Again, quite a precise definition.
Yeah, it's saying how you can, by applying these techniques, get the maximum out of what you're doing, because the work you're doing isn't diluted by distractions or legacy of your previous task, which sometimes prevents full focus. And it made a lot of sense, really.
Yeah, he's coined this term deep work, so he says. Yeah. And then, like you're saying, there's some nice little anecdotes in the first couple of chapters. He talks about Woody Allen on page 4.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Woody Allen's in or out at the moment. I've watched quite a few of his films in lockdown, actually.
Oh, okay. So 23 Academy Award nominations he had, didn't he?
Yeah, and he did 44 films between 1969 and 2013. What Cal Newport's saying is Woody Allen never owned a computer.
Yeah.
He just typed everything on a typewriter. There's a couple more people. He mentions J.K. Rowling wasn't on social media when she was writing Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And then he mentions Bill Gates.
Yeah, that's right. He did, yes.
Bill Gates famously used to go
Think Week
by himself, didn't he? And in 1995, he came up with this paper on the internet and what the internet was going to be. It really helped Microsoft plan forward. I think there's some really good things there.
I thought definitely worth reading, definitely worth trying to aspire to embrace some of the things and how to change your life. The social media and how should we talk about each chapter in turn, how we go through it? And because it's pretty clear and divided in its viewpoints, unlike when we looked at how to win friends and influence people, it was seeping in. Each chapter was kind of seeping into the other, and a bit of repetition, where this one is really nice and cut clearly. So chapter 1 talked about how deep work was valuable and how you can achieve so much more when you get into that deep concentrating zone. The references he made, I think in this chapter, he started about some baseball stats guy who became an election forecaster.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that was the same guy. There was a movie, wasn't there? Moneyball.
Oh, yeah.
Did you see that movie?
No, I think that was a different guy.
It's a good movie. It's how to, when you're in business and you're making decisions, to try to not make decisions based on emotion. So most baseball people didn't like the guy because he had tattoos or he swore or whatever. They were biased in their opinion of these people. And they got this mathematician guy working for a baseball club, the first they'd ever got. And he purely went just on the facts, and they recruited different players who everyone else rejected because they rejected them for maybe the wrong reasons. And yes, I just wondered whether it was the same guy who was famous for that, and he made this baseball club the best in the US.
And then he talks about a computer programmer as well called David Hansen,
Ruby on Rails or something, wasn't it? Which was all of the IT stuff behind Twitter and Hulu. And
as Cal's going through it, he starts talking about why these people do so well. And he said there's two ways of doing it. There's the micro way of looking at things in terms of their personality traits and their tactics, and then the macro way of doing things, and we look at more of the work that they represent. He references loads of different people, doesn't he?
Yeah, tons. Yeah.
He talks about a book called Race Against the Machine, and this idea of the great restructuring and how technology is restructuring society.
Yeah.
And what that means to us.
Yeah. So like the automation, I mean, it applies a lot in any transactional work, finance, legal, where you can automate a lot of the transactional stuff, and also talks about, brilliant people like the guy, what was he called, David Hansen. He was a brilliant programmer. You're probably better off hiring him rather than hiring your own programmer with an office, a desk, a pension, all of that stuff, because it'll probably be cheaper and better. So it's an interesting one.
He's saying there's three groups of people. There's the high skilled workers, who are like your baseball guy. Then he's talking about the superstars, and those high skilled workers, a key question they need to ask themselves is, are they good at working with intelligent machines or not? Your baseball stats guy, he's using machines or programming to pump out his statistics. And then he talks about the superstars like Hansen, who would just get really good at doing certain things and then can basically work from anywhere. And then the last thing he talks about, the last group of people is the owners. And these are the
venture capital kind of people, isn't it?
Who've got the capital to invest in these new technologies. I love this idea he's got. He said it's not always a good idea to have money to invest. In post-war Europe, it was a bad time to be sitting on a pile of cash. Because there was rapid inflation and also taxation. So a lot of people's fortunes were wiped out, and he calls it the Downton Abbey effect.
Yeah, I remember that. Good quote. I mean, loads of really well written I'm not taking anything away from computer scientists, but he's written almost like a novel in some stages, and lots of great anecdotes.
So he builds these ideas, doesn't he? As we go through chapter 1 on page 28, he starts to sketch out how to become a winner. If we accept this idea that there's a new economy and there's this restructuring, how to become a winner. And he's got these two core abilities. The ability to quickly master hard things and the ability to produce at an elite level. It's so important, isn't it?
So the first one where he says the ability to master hard things. I can't remember the exact things he talked about, but he basically, didn't he talk about that you mentioned him, Nate Silver. He was the baseball man. And as you say, he didn't just use computers to do things faster. He harnessed the computer to really help him forecast in a way that computers couldn't do, if that makes sense. He laterally thought about the information and linked it.
He wrote quite a good book, Nate Silver, called The Signal and the Noise.
Oh, really? I don't know anything about that, James.
I'm ashamed to say that I bought the book and I have never read it. Maybe I will now.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about being an IT whiz. He said it doesn't matter who you are. If you want to be a world-class yoga instructor, you've got to master increasingly complex physical skills. So it's not just about IT. It's just his basic premise that you've got to master hard things.
All the way through, he's building ideas, isn't he?
Yeah. It's a real great, I mean, as I say, great architecture. It takes you on a journey.
So fluid, the book, the way it runs through. And on page 33, once he's established that there's these two things you need to do in terms of mastering hard things and then
the ability to perform deep work.
So then he's saying that his next big kind of point is deep work helps you learn quickly the hard things. Then he mentions this Dominican friar, I can't even say his name, Sertigalanes.
I'm not even going to try, James.
Wrote a book in the early 20th century called The Intellectual Life.
Intellectual Life, yeah.
I recognised the necessity of mastering complicated material. That guy was saying, the friar was saying, to do that, you require intense concentration.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to talk about some psychologists who built on those ideas, and then he moves on to this quite punchy idea of deliberate practice.
I think he said if you focus on one task and really concentrate for an extended period of time, he thinks that's much, much better than doing lots of unrelated tasks. I forgot what he called it. Did he call it Q or something?
Oh, flow.
No, he talked about flow later. I don't think it was flow. You get into the zone. I suppose it's a bit like flow. And he says when you go from task A to task B, your attention doesn't follow immediately.
Yeah.
He talked about a residue of attention.
Yeah.
Your thinking is a bit stuck thinking about the original work. That's it. Attention residue is what he said. And the residue, he says it's particularly thick if your work on task A was fairly low intense before you switched. And, it's not just opinion. It's based on lots of psychologists' research and stuff.
Yeah.
And people who experience attention residue after switching tasks are going to perform quite poorly on the next task, he says.
Yeah.
And basically, if you work on a single task for a long time, that intention residue is going to be minimized.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're going to maximize performance from one task.
Yeah.
So I thought that was not a bad way, as it explained in later chapters, why deep work's rare.
Yeah.
It's a pretty hard thing to do in the world we live.
I like the bit where he's talking about the science behind it in terms of brain chemistry. And he found this research on this thing called myelin. It's something that goes around your neurons and your brain.
Yeah.
And to develop this stuff, you've got to concentrate.
Okay, I missed that. Yeah, I get it.
I'm on page 36 there.
Let me just go back to 36 in the mind. Okay, yes, all right. I do remember now. Yes, yes. Myelin improvement. Yeah. So it's kind of like brain training, really.
Yeah.
It's like mental fitness, isn't it? Mental health fitness and stuff like that, which is very much in the news at the moment.
My favourite part of this chapter is on page 44.
Okay.
He's got this, what about Jack Dorsey?
Okay.
Do you like that?
Yes. Well, some people might be thinking who are listening, we're supposed to really focus in the zone on one thing and we've become much better at it. But then super successful Jack Dorsey. Go on, James. Sorry I interrupted.
I would hesitate to compare myself with Jack Dorsey, but I felt a lot of his pain in terms of he's running Twitter and he's running Square, which is another company, and he doesn't do any deep work at all.
That's right.
Because
so how come he's so successful then? But I thought he answered the argument really well.
Yeah. Go on. What did you like about it?
Well, I liked it because he said CEOs have to be that way. And basically he described a CEO as a hard to automate decision engine.
Yeah.
And he said they have a built-in repository of experience and have honed and proved an instinct for their market.
Yeah.
And he said rather than Jack Dorsey spend hours deep thinking, I think he should employ 3 deep thinkers on his payroll and let them come to him with their insights, and then Jack Dorsey makes the decision on it. But the decision would be made on great insight.
I've got a slightly different view on that. I think Cal Newport's right what he's saying about Jack Dorsey. And I think when you're running something like Twitter or a company, people are constantly coming at you. And the only way you can set the tone is by being shallow quite a lot of the time. But I've got a good friend of mine called Nigel Botterill.
Yeah, I've read that Botty's Rules. Yeah.
Botty's Rules. And in there, he talks about doing 90 minutes a day. He comes into work, and for the first 90 minutes, he basically locks himself away doing deep work, although he's not talking about deep work. Yeah. But he locks himself away for 90 minutes, does his deep work, and then he comes out into the office, and the rest of the day is shallow.
Yeah.
I think Nigel's got the balance right there.
No, interesting. He's kind of an advocate. He talks about that Wharton professor who was the youngest professor ever, and professors get judged on how many papers they write. And he's also the most popular teacher in Wharton, every year voted the best guy. But he would only teach September to December, and then he spent spring and summer focusing on his output. And it was as though, I don't know, it's basically saying you can't multitask, wasn't he, really?
Yeah.
But then I just wonder, could you not train your brain, like you've just said your mate Nigel maybe can do, to spend 90 minutes? I mean, I think Elon Musk, doesn't he have his diary split into 10 minutes? Each 10 minutes of the day or something. Something crazy like that. So he somehow focuses for 10 minutes on that thing. Hey, I'm not knocking what the book's saying. It's interesting. Could that not be explored, that people maybe could become super concentrators in 10 minutes? Sometimes if you're a gymnast and you've got a 3-minute routine, you probably have to be absolutely in the zone just for that moment, don't you?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I thought chapter 1 was quite good.
No, I agreed. And it was just kind of saying, listen, this stuff is really good to do because of these reasons, and quoted various examples of how people who practice it achieve great success. Basically, it was putting the case forward for do deep work because it's a great thing to do, and these are the reasons why.
Okay.
It's not a light-hearted, breezy read. You do have to concentrate and take it all in, but I think it's quite a good thing.
There was a lot in it, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Chapter 2 then is all about why deep work doesn't occur.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, what I got from it, if it's so great, why aren't we all doing it?
Yeah, that's a very good summation explanation of it. And I think what he's saying is that modern life pushes us away from deep work and to shallow work.
Didn't he talk about Google HQ? Couldn't quite believe it, but he said Google HQ, designed by Frank Gehry. He's probably most expensive and most famous architects.
Facebook HQ.
Is that in Mountain View, California? I don't think it said that, but I think that's where it is. He said that they got 3,000 people on the largest open floor plan in the world that covers over 10 acres.
Yeah.
So it was all open. And I think the point is, in our modern way of working, our modern way of living, it's very old-fashioned. And I often think a bit weird where people have their own office. I never see that in any business I go into. You might see it maybe in the military or something like that, or I've seen it in the Home Office, I think, but just because they've got these legacy buildings that maybe they haven't refurbed.
Yeah.
Having an office is weird, but I suppose to go into deep work is probably helped by having an office and free from distraction.
That guy Jack Dorsey, in the last chapter, he likes serendipity, didn't he?
That's right, because again, that business he talked about, Square, which is like it's like PayPal, isn't it? Square in the States. He bought this massive newspaper building, which obviously had huge, big open space where they'd put the printing presses. And as you rightly say, they all had long shared tables as it go on, serendipity. So what did you understand by serendipity?
Well, I like the way you're saying that. What would you say? It's just the positive chance encounters, would you say?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Just by being there, you discover things by sharing things together. And he thought people walking by each other would teach each other new things just by, I didn't realise that. Oh, really? Oh, yeah, okay. I'm sure there must be someone trying to scientifically prove serendipity.
But Cal Newport, our featured author this week, doesn't really believe in it, does he?
No, not really. No, he's more of a scientist, you're right. And so he basically says, look, this is Google, this is Jack Dorsey, the guy behind Twitter and stuff. And although we've said deep work's a great thing, the reality it isn't, because here's two of the world's richest, most successful companies, and they don't exactly encourage it by the way they set their stall out.
So there's basically three things he's talking about. He's talking about the rise of instant messaging, so you can all talk. He's talking about sitting next to each other. And the third trend he's talking about is for content producers to maintain social media presence.
Yeah.
So they're the three trends he's talking about. What he's saying here on page 51 is he believes those three trends highlight a paradox because they don't go to deep work, do they? They go to
and he says once upon a time a lot of work which we did would be quantifiable. I'm going to produce 10 widgets a day. That would be the industry standard. If I produce 11, I'm doing really well. But in a lot of jobs, the tangible output is not there so much these days, and therefore we try to demonstrate our busyness by responding to emails at all hours, by hooking up in meetings all the time, which maybe really aren't too much to do with us. And it just screws the whole ability to really focus up. And we would be considered incompetent, I think, if we were not connected all the time. The other great thing I thought about that, James, with my accounting hat on, I'll have to find the actual figures on it, but he talked about email and he talked about some analyst working out the time spent. And he basically said it would be enough to fund a Learjet for the company every year. No one ever talks about that. They think, it's really important that you respond to your email straight away. But actually, the smart people probably have a window in their diary when they look at email, and then they turn the email off and focus on deep work.
That's correct, isn't it? Yeah. Tim Ferriss famously only looks at his emails once a day. The guy who wrote the 4-hour work.
Yeah. Oh, does he? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a guy. What was the guy that used to run not John Coles, the bloke that ran Phones for You?
Oh yeah, John Caldwell.
John Caldwell. I was going to say John Coleshaw, but he's the comedian, isn't he? John Caldwell. He wouldn't allow any emails on a Friday.
Right.
Completely banned them, and I'm pretty certain he banned phone calls as well. If you wanted to talk to someone, you had to physically go and talk to them, because he found that all his office workers were just emailing each other. And even worse, they were CCing another 10 people, just like sapping time up. Pretty successful, old John Caldwell. I think the quote I wrote down was, in a business setting without clear feedback on the impact of various behaviors to the bottom line will tend towards behaviors that are easiest in the moment. So if you get an answer to a question straight away, that makes life easier in the moment. If you couldn't count on a quick response, instead you'd have to do a bit more advanced planning, be more organized, be prepared to put things aside for a while. That's going to make your life harder.
So this is
I made a note on that. I can't remember which page that was on, James, but
that's off 58, isn't it? Newport is calling that the principle of least resistance.
Which isn't necessarily the best thing to do, but it's the easiest thing to do.
When we tend towards behaviours that are the easiest in the moment. And then building on from there on 58, 59, he's talking about feeling satisfyingly productive. So if you're doing lots of emails, it feels like you're doing
Interesting, though, because we don't have metrics on the cost of emails.
Yeah.
But you have metrics on everything else. Think about in traditional way of working, both you and I have backgrounds as management accountants originally. And, you used to look at yields and the contribution per square meter and all that kind of stuff. Yet people are happily allowed to be on emails all day, talking probably a lot of rubbish a lot of the time. And no one actually sees that as a cost.
Yeah.
I wonder whether that'll change.
The other thing he talks about is having regular recurring meetings for projects.
And a waste of time a bit.
Yeah, well, that's sort of building what you were just saying. That
and another easy one I noted down was when people just forward you an email and thoughts in inverted commas.
Yeah,
it's like they send it. It takes them seconds to write, but can command many minutes, even hours of the receiver's time.
Yeah,
and say, but literally craft your emails a bit better, so you're going to reduce the time spent by all parties.
Yeah,
So what's the reason all these time-sucking behaviours are so common?
Yeah,
and I think it was that they're easier to do.
Well, that's so I like this. So on 61, he's got this thing about busyness is a proxy for productivity.
Yeah, I thought that was a great line. Yeah.
So people are just being present and doing stuff, but actually not doing anything of any value.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting whether that becomes apparent in lockdown. Because it is all about performance and not presenteeism, isn't it? Really, in lockdown, you can't just look busy because you're not visible. So what are you actually producing? What are you performing on?
Yeah.
So maybe it'll change the whole nature of work, and maybe that's not a bad thing. We're not making so many midgets an hour anymore, but if we can't define what we're making, what are we doing, kind of thing.
So you're bringing us on there to page 63 because he mentions Frederick Taylor.
Frederick Winslow Taylor, yes.
Very famous.
That takes you back. Bethlehem Steelworks, wasn't it?
Was it? Okay, yeah.
I think it was Taylorism was the scientific. Before people got more into like studying management, there was three types of management thought. There was bureaucratic, which was Max Weber.
Right.
I think administrative, which was some French guy, Henri Fayol. And then there was the bloke, Frederick Taylor. And what he did, he was in the steelworks working out, do I need a tall man, a short man, a 16-stone man, a 10-stone man? Do I need a long, thin shovel, a wide shovel? What is the best way of shoveling coal into the steel furnaces? Yeah. And he combined science of the job and the science of the man to see what would get the maximum productivity. So that was Frederick. That's what he was all about in his efficiency kind of studies. But the irony of all of that, though, was the problem with because he thought if you got the best scientifically selected person to do the best scientifically designed job, they'd be most productive and they'd earn loads of money and they'd be really happy. Yeah. But actually, the whole problem with that efficiency movement is it's not about earning money. There's that caused the whole movement of what was called the human relations school, where you thought about motivation and job content and happiness in work. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off the point a bit.
No. I like it.
Frederick Taylor, that's it's a window into how people used to think about managing people.
So he's talking about widgets created, and he's saying that many knowledge workers are turning towards this old definition of productivity now. Yeah. Because there's no other way of looking at it. And
I think the interesting one, I can't remember which page it was on, but she was quite famous for it. Was it that in this chapter? The woman from Marissa Mayer.
Oh, yeah, Yahoo's CEO, yeah.
I mean, I just thought, what are you on? Basically, she became the new CEO and she caused a major kind of hoo-ha because she banned home working.
Yeah.
And it transpires that she kind of banned home working because she saw that Yahoo's employees were not logging onto their server often enough. Yeah. And the only reason you would log onto the server would be to check your emails. So she kind of said, right, you've all got to come into the office to check your emails more, kind of punishing people for not being visibly busy.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all do it. A lot of people, I do a bit of I do some online training for a big American business, and there's all kinds of rules in training in America, and they have to have it's unbelievable. Someone has to listen to me for 8 hours. I just
Really?
poor people. Continuously, and a little message comes up, I think, every 40 minutes, like, are you there? Ping. I'm sure they're just carrying a little laptop around with the sound turned down and just pressing yes, I'm here, which defeats the whole object of it, really. Again, it's just being present as opposed to performing.
Yeah.
And I thought Yahoo would be better than that, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe, going back to the premise of the chapter, deep work's rare because people are judged by their busyness and their ability to answer an email straight away.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to rethink about that.
So moving on to page 66 then. So he talks about the email thing, and then he's talking about what he calls the cult of the internet. I really like this, and he's saying that he talks about this journalist called Elisa Rubin, who's on the New York Times.
Yeah.
He said he can only assume that she, at the persistent urging of her employers, she has to release tweets every day or so.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how companies are encouraging staff members to put stuff on social media.
Yeah, and to be tweeting all the time. And it basically, wasn't they saying that, in that kind of culture, aren't we encouraging everyone to kind of waste their time?
Yeah.
In a way.
And I love this idea on page 67. He's got this thing called the technopoly.
Yeah.
Technopoly. And what he's saying is, there's this assumption that if something's high tech, we all just assume that it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And it might not necessarily be the case, might it?
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. I mean, I can't really put it any better than you put it, James. But we believe it is. That's it. This is better. So is it better to use word processor than? Oh, probably is better to use word processor than typing. But you know what I'm saying? Not everything is necessarily. Is it better to listen to digital music than vinyl?
Yeah.
Not everyone would agree.
I like the thing he says at the bottom of page 68. He says the alternative to not embracing all things internet is to make yourself invisible and therefore irrelevant. And
he talk about some professor who kind of defined himself as irrelevant, didn't, rather than getting invited to loads of non-relevant meetings, he just said, look, I'm irrelevant. I'm not rocking up.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I had a friend who was a really successful fund manager, and he didn't go to any company training. My wife worked in HR, and he just, don't do that. But actually, his job was to invest and be successful with all the clients' money, and he was really good at that. And he didn't think it was necessary to go on, I don't know, not saying that, but to go on training that he didn't see any relevance whatsoever to fund management. And he didn't go to any meetings or anything like that. He had his little fund team, and when the markets closed, he went home.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything else. But what he was employed to do was to be really good at that, and he was really good at it.
It's fair enough, isn't it? It's interesting.
Yeah. So there's all these little anecdotes of kind of verifying that this maybe isn't a bad thing to do.
Well, so that brings us on to page 70, and his big idea, I suppose, at the end of this chapter, his big idea is that deep work may well be bad for business, but good for you.
Yes. So that it's kind of teeing up for
the next chapter.
Yeah, and I think there is something in that as well. I think I think there's a problem with a lot of junior managers in particular these days, never being let off the lead because their managers, senior ones, are always on. Even if they're on the beach, they're monitoring things on their mobile phone.
Yeah.
Whereas once upon a time, your boss would go away for 2 weeks and you would have to work it out yourself and maybe mess up, but that's how you learn. But the ability to be free to learn is maybe a bit less because you're always on, which I think is bad for business as well, really.
So I think that one of the last points he makes on 71 is that depth will have become increasingly rare and therefore increasingly valuable.
Yeah.
So echoing what you just said, really, isn't it?
Because we're just a bit skimming over everything and just focus on what you do. I mean, you work in the NHS, James. I don't want to, or you don't work, but you work for the NHS, and there's a big movement I've been reading about how it's far better than you being a generalist surgeon just to be an ankle surgeon, and all the operations you do all day are ankles.
Yeah.
You become an absolute genius at ankles.
Yeah.
And the care system is set up just for ankles, and the productivity of such a place is, triple where they're doing, all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want to get controversial, but what's your view on all of that?
Well, no, I agree. I think I agree with that. Yeah, definitely. Much better to go to a specialist centre and be dealt with by a specialist than to go down to your district general hospital down the road and see a guy who's been doing knees and ankles, hips, and
yeah. I mean, it's interesting, the whole automation of that world. Again, we're going off a little bit, but a lot of medicine is based on science. I've got a pain here. Okay, do you have a pain there? Yes. Do you have a pain there? No. Oh, well, you can. There's a kind of a structured inquiry language about what your ailment is, and you could argue a lot of that could be automated.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, chapter 3 then. Chapter 3 is his kind of, I feel, his sort of manifesto. Is in chapter 3 he's sort of saying it becomes quite fundamental to him because it's called deep work is meaningful. Yeah. So it's like his credo. His credo, is that the right word?
Well, it's just he's kind of saying that, look, we've talked about this, and actually, if one thing to remember, whatever your reason for thinking about deep work, it's good for your physical well-being to be this way.
Yeah. I love this. I mean, there's quite a long sort of on 72, 73. The long kind of passage on this guy who's a blacksmith.
Yeah, he's a bit more than the blacksmith, though, isn't he? Wasn't he making Viking swords or something? and he actually, I can't remember, he had to make it out of a steel, which he had to craft himself. He kind of made the steel himself and then hammered an ingot, and it was basically, it sounds a bit odd, but it took him 9 hours to make the sword, and if he did the process slightly wrong, it would all shatter, and that's 7 hours work wasted. So it was kind of, a blacksmith, it gets into like a Zen-like concentration state. Yeah.
I like that. And he said, and then he's talking about, so he's talking about the blacksmith guy, and then he says, when we shift our attention to knowledge work, the connection between what we're doing and the bits of the job, it gets very muddied. And he's saying, I like this on page 75, but halfway down. He said, no one would fault the blacksmith for not using Facebook, but if a knowledge worker makes the same decision, he's labelled as an eccentric.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why do we need to be on Facebook or posting stuff? I mean, I think Facebook can help. Depends what kind of job you're doing. I think it's back to that juxtaposition of Jack Dorsey and a deep worker. If you want to have an engaged team and you're managing a team, and if you're sharing personal things about yourself on Facebook or like the corporate Facebook, things like Slack and Yammer and those kind of things, I think that's good, but that's not really what this book is saying, is it? It's saying, look, there's a role in the world for deep thinkers, deep workers, and there's a huge benefit from adopting this kind of behavioural mindset.
Yeah. So as you go on there, as he says, deep work can generate a lot of satisfaction And then he then sort of argues in a trajectory. He starts with a neurological perspective, psychological, and he ends with the philosophical.
Philosophical. I think the philosophical, I had to read it a few times, but I mean, it's kind of, I saw the whole chapter as like a call to arms that a deep life is not just going to be economically lucrative, like the programmer who became, a brilliant programmer making loads of cash from programming. So he's not just potentially going to make a load of cash, but it's going to be a life well lived.
Yeah.
You're going to get much more out of your life. I thought that was quite a good.
Yeah. I like the story.
So then he goes, go on.
I said, I like the story on 76 about the poor lady got a really bad cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, yeah.
She decided to not focus on it and instead to focus on the stuff that she really liked in life, which is she had movies, walks, and a 6:30 martini.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
which is, it's whether you, I love that. I thought it was great, and it's basically saying we have the ability to focus, and often we only do that in times such as this lady didn't have long to live. So she said, look, I haven't got long to live. Let's live a good life, as opposed to, spend my time worrying about my cancer. I've got my cancer and I've got it and I can't do much about it, but I can do something about living a good life. So let's live a good life. And I think that was how you understood that, James?
Yeah. No, definitely. I like the bit about, so on 78, it kind of goes into a bit more the neurology of it. They did an experiment at Stanford University, and they showed images, positive.
It's great. Is this the old and the young people?
Yeah,
I like that. Go on, explain it. I thought that was great.
And the young people, I can't say this word.
You know what I did? I couldn't say that word either, and I did some work. There's a neuroscientist I did some work with, pronounced it perfectly. So you know what I did? I went on the internet. There's a site on the internet where you can put the word in, and it speaks to you how to pronounce it. Because I thought we might have to say this word. So
can you say?
Shame on you, James, not looking how to pronounce it on the internet. But I think the pronunciation is amygdala.
Okay.
Amygdala, which is the emotion part of your brain, isn't it?
So the young people, that part of their brain, which you've just said, when they've shown positive and negative images, they fired activity in both types of image. But when they did it to old people, they only fired for the positive images.
Yeah.
The hypothesis was that the elderly people had trained their prefrontal cortex to inhibit the presence of negative stimuli.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? How you can... there's lots of things that it's. I mean, going slightly off the case, but some people get really bad. I cycle around London a bit, and I sometimes see bus drivers, screaming and getting really angry. I think, mate, you're in the wrong job. You're driving around London all day. You can't be switched on by someone cutting you up. You've got to kind of, just get over it. And they need. I would say, that crazy bus drivers you sometimes see it's not good for their health. No. And if you can train your brain to just not react to those things, which obviously is what these old people do. They rewired their brain to just kind of not really pay any attention to the negative stuff.
I
thought it was really good. Savor the positives. Why dwell on the negatives? Savor the positives. And if you can, simply by managing your attention, they improved their world.
Yeah.
And they didn't change anything concrete in their world. They just kind of changed the focus of their lens, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was kind of saying if you can change your lens to one that kind of isn't distracted by all the nonsense and the negative things, you'll live a better life. And it was kind of this was putting forward the neurological argument that actually, if you do this, you're going to be you're going to have a better life.
Yeah, I like
emotionally and everything else.
So then he talks a bit more about some types of emails that he'd received. I thought it was a bit boring. Page 80, 81.
Yeah, I didn't. Let me remind myself. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I didn't really. I didn't write anything notes or do anything on that one.
No. So back to page 83, and he talks about another psychological study where they gave people pages. This was a while ago. This study.
Yeah.
And
Can you pronounce that scientist's name as well?
No. Yes.
It's about 25 letters, isn't it? Csikszentmihalyi. And it's like some Russian or Eastern European thing, is it? I might be wrong. But there's a lot of Z's and S's and C's in it.
So he gave these people these study pages, and they paid them to say, "How are you feeling right now?"
Yeah.
And he said what he came to sort of believe was the best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. And he called that flow.
That's right. He actually coined the phrase flow, didn't he?
Yeah. I like it about halfway down, page 84. What he was saying was, it was, ironically, jobs are actually easier to enjoy than free time. Yeah,
I like that. I mean, he kind of, I thought that was very interesting, because he kind of said that when you've got a job, he said it's kind of ironic that jobs are easier to enjoy, because like flow, jobs have clear objectives, clear goals, and people really concentrate, and they kind of lose themselves in their job. But in free time, it's unstructured, and there's a lot more effort to shape it into something meaningful and enjoyable. Whereas if you can really create a sense of flow, that's when the best moments occur. As you say, your body and mind is stretched to its limits. I thought it was good. And it's unfortunately something we don't do. I mean, basically, I think in a nutshell, he said the meaning and satisfaction of life is going to be maximized if you spend more time in that kind of state of flow, in a way.
Yeah, like that. So onto page 86, and he comes to the end of this chapter now. He starts to talk about this philosophical argument for depth. He's got this thing about,
it got a bit deep for me, this, to be honest. About the shiny things and stuff. Shiny
things, yeah.
What do you think he was meaning about people used to worship gods and stuff?
Yeah.
Like shiny gods.
Yeah.
And then he said that we've kind of moved on. We're kind of...
he blames it all on Descartes, doesn't he?
Yeah.
In the Enlightenment, people changed their view on, people started to believe in human rights. And in doing that, we've tasked ourselves to identify what's meaningful in life and what's not. Whereas in the past, kings and other people like that would have told us what was meaningful and what's not.
Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that, James. Because the penny didn't quite drop for me on that.
So I'm about 3/4 of the way down 87. I like this quote. He said, "Craftsmanship provides a key to reopening a sense of sacredness."
Yes.
Responsible manner.
Yeah. You can kind of worship the craft and take joy in the craft.
Yeah.
So he talked very early in the chapter about the guy making the Viking sword. He kind of looked at that sword with a sense of pride and, wow, I've done this kind of thing. But you don't have to be a sword maker, he goes on, doesn't he, about what is a craft.
Yeah, I like that. And he's talking about computer programmers. And writing code, and that can be craft.
I mean, the quote says, "Beautiful code is short and concise." So if you were to give that code to another programmer, would say, "Oh, that's a well-written code." I'll take his word for that. Maybe there's a lovely structure and a flow to nice code. He said it's like writing a poem. Maybe.
He said, so I'm just moving on to 91. He said, you don't need to have a rarefied job.
No, that's right.
Instead, a rarefied approach to your work. So it's your approach to the thing rather than the thing itself.
Yeah, you're dead right. And it reminds me of, it's how you look at what you do, and it reminds me of the bloke who was sweeping up in a warehouse, and he happened to be sweeping up in NASA's warehouse, and the guy asked him, what do you do? And he didn't say, oh, I'm just a cleaner. He says, oh, I help put people on the moon. And it might sound a bit corny, but he was genuinely focused in his work, because by sweeping up, no bits of dust or fluff got into the rocket engine, and therefore the rocket took off safely. And if you had bits of dust and debris in the engine, it would crash and the whole thing would be a disaster. So he is helping put people on the moon. And sometimes I don't know whether that works. Sometimes, I mean, again, just going back to the NHS, if people who are maybe hospital project managers and finance directors or whatever see themselves as important as a brilliant surgeon, but they are all a team, aren't they? And
very much.
I think it's important that everyone value. I think that a lot of people, but sometimes you see that some people think they'd be a little bit better than others.
Yeah. But it's about your approach, and like you said, it's about your approach and how you do it. So let's sum up this chapter then. So he says the first 2 chapters were pragmatic, and this final chapter is it's all about
what you'll do if you do it. It's kind of good for your health in a way.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult thing to do. It's a really important thing to do. He quote, his earlier quote talks about, "I'll live the focused life because it's the best kind there is." A deep life is a good life, any way you look at it, rather than a superficial, shallow one.
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I mean, to sum up then for me, I enjoyed that.
No, I did as well. It said, listen, everyone, this is what deep work is. This is why it's valuable. But to be honest, it's pretty hard because of the way we live our lives, and we need to kind of see beyond the way how our lives are valued through instant response and all the distractions out there. And then, went into those kind of more deeper kind of philosophical and psychological kind of facts in chapter 3, saying, look, it is a good thing for these main reasons. And then, okay, so there we go. We've set the stall out.
Yeah.
Next one, we're going to say, well, if you want to actually live this life that we've said is great life, this is what you need to do. And this is how you, and the chapters, just to give you a little taste. The first one was about working deeply, embrace boredom, quit social media.
Yeah, this is part 2 even now.
Yeah, part 2. Yes, this is what we're going to talk about next time. Yeah. And drain the shallows. So it's an interesting one. And I do wonder what will happen. I sound like an old man here, but the way kids are, on social media, especially at the moment, 6-8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Maybe there's got to be some value coming out of that, but is that going to do something to this generation based on some of this psychological, neurological research he's talking about? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've enjoyed doing part 1.
Yeah.
We're going to do part 2 next time.
Nice, a really nice, tight book, though. I'd really, I'm not necessarily going to recommend every book, but I just thought it was really well, really well crafted, the way it was put together.
Yeah, great. All right then, Sean. So I'll speak to you again next time when we go into part 2 and we really get into what the rules are of deep work.
Yeah. Look forward to it, James.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye.